Consolation in the furnace. Now, you know what consolation is. It's something that you would share with somebody who's had a major loss in their life or have had a disappointment. You would go to them and try to console them, try to make them feel better about what's happened in their life. And if you're a sports fanatic, and you win the consolation prize, that's not first place. That's somebody that wasn't as good as somebody else is. So consolation can take on different meanings depending on the situation and how you use it. So this coming Sunday, somebody's going to get a consolation prize, correct? We don't know who that's going to be. There's a lot of conjecture about who that'll be. But in Daniel, our story talks about some men that were walking around inside of a furnace. And he tells them to come out. Well, I got to thinking about that, and I thought, you know what? There's no consolation there because they're winners. They went in that furnace and were supposed to be killed by it. They were supposed to be burned up, burned alive. Remember, he heated the furnace 7 times hotter than it's normal. Well, I questioned myself, how did he measure the temperature to make sure it was 7 times hotter than normal? I mean, a burning furnace is a burning furnace. But maybe I'll ask Jesus that when we get to heaven. How did he get that furnace 7 times hotter? But the fact is, it tells a wonderful story about the delivery of those Hebrews from a fiery furnace. Nebuchadnezzar had cast them in there because they'd refused to obey his call to worship. Worship a golden image that he had built because of his own pride in his heart. Even after the fact that Daniel had already interpreted dreams for him, and he recognized that Daniel and these boys had a special gift, a gift from a God that they were worshiping, that they learned about. When did they learn about that God? When they were young children. So the children that are here today and the young people that are here today, I hope get some meaning out of this, that God speaks to us all the time, no matter what age you are. These young boys, remember, had been taken away from their home, from their family, marched them out across a desert for I don't know how long it took them to get to where they were going, but quite a while. They were brought to go back to college, to go to school, to learn to be a Chaldean. Well, the Chaldeans didn't worship their God. And we know the situation. If you read Daniel, you find that they were all going to be annihilated because they couldn't interpret a dream for the king. But because of their special gift and their relationship to God, God had blessed them. And he gave Daniel the meaning to that dream. And through that meaning, Daniel got promoted and these young men got promoted. So now they are out on this plain of Dura. And the king is so proud of himself, he says everybody's going to kneel down and worship this golden image, and if you don't, in the furnace you go. They had put their trust in God. And if we look in Daniel 3, it tells the whole story about the golden image. But I want to focus on two verses, 16 and 18. Now they had been asked to kneel and worship this golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had built. And in 16, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. You see, when the first time the music played, they didn't kneel down. And so the king comes to them and says, hey, how come you guys didn't kneel down? And they said, well, we just don't do that. We don't worship another god. And so they're telling him that because of what he said, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from a burning fiery furnace. He will deliver us from your hand, O king. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your God, nor will we worship the golden image which you have set up. They didn't make any excuses. And there's all kind of things they could have done to make it look like they were bowing down and worshiping this golden idol. But they weren't playing games with the king. They told it to him just like it was. We trust in the God that we serve. And even if he doesn't save us, we're not going to bow down and worship your golden idol. You will just have to burn us up in that furnace. There's a number of helpful lessons in this story. These young men believed in the freedom of conscience because they believed that their duty to God came before man. Let's look at Acts chapter 4, verse 19 and 20. Chapter 4, verse 19. And this is talking about when Peter had been arrested and been released, or had been taken out of prison. In verse 19, but Peter and John answered and said to them, now these are the Pharisees that had told them not to preach and not to worship Jesus, not to do this. Don't use his name. But Peter and John answered and said unto them, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you be the judge. For we cannot but speak the things which we have seen and heard. What does that say to us today? We live in a world that's dying. We live in a world that has kicked God out of our country, in this country here, and other places in the world. Those who believe, like we do, or who are professed Christians, are being persecuted today as I speak because they worship the God, our Creator God. How do we deal with that here in California? We're seeing things happen in our state where we're losing our freedom. We tried to buy some insurance for our home the other day, and I can't get insured for fire in the state of California without paying a horrendous amount of money for insurance. I don't know how you are down here in the valley, but if you live up in the mountains, you can get it if you got enough money to buy it. And we know that it's because of the big wildfires we've had and all that, but insurance companies and our government and the way things are being run, it's almost prohibitive to own any property up there. You've taken away your liberties and your freedom. Businesses that have used that have been how do I want to say it, have been there for us to use, like insurance companies. There's several of them would offer a program or a plan where people could get insurance for your house or your car or life insurance or whatever it is. A lot of these things are being taken away because of greed. A lot of it's because of the fire. They say, well, but look at PG&E caused some of these fires. We know they've proven that, and now PG&E comes along and raises their rates, and they've just got permission to raise them again. So you see, the working class people, like most of us are losing our ability to function almost in a state. And I'm laughing, but it's not funny. It's true. And so, faced with the same thing, Peter and John are saying, whether it is right in the sight of God to listen to you more than to God, you be the judge. For we cannot speak the things which we have, but cannot speak the things which we have seen and heard. So when they had further threatened them, they let them go, finding no way to punish them because of the people, since they all glorified God for what had been done. We're faced with the same types of decisions that Peter and John had to make. Do we worship God and are faithful to Him, or do we listen to man and his demands? As we look back into the history of persecution, which we're talking about with these Hebrews that were in the furnace, persecution was used by Satan to punish people all through the ages. You can read the history and you will see for yourself. The furnace of affliction is to frighten people into submission to His will. So when we have stresses and trials in our life, a lot of times it's to strengthen us for what's coming. We wonder sometimes why we have to go through a trial or a tribulation. And I think when the time comes, we'll find out that it was for our own benefit. Just like the Hebrew children were. They went through that fiery furnace was for their own edification. They were able to witness for God. And what are we told in Acts chapter 1, verse 8? You will be my witness. I'm paraphrasing it. In the whole world. If you've chosen to follow me, you will be. And what had these three Hebrews done to give them such a cruel treatment? Did they steal anything from somebody, or did they tell a lie? Did they do something that was warrant of correction? No. So why are God-fearing men the special object of persecution? Why do you think that is? Let's look in Luke chapter 11, verse 49. Therefore, the wisdom of God also says, I will send them prophets and apostles, and some of them they will kill and persecute. So it's prophesied that if you stand up for Jesus and you trust in Him, when the rubber hits the road, you may lose your life. Or you may be thrown in jail, or you may lose your home, or you may, who knows what may take place. When we see a world that's falling apart around us, that we can't even trust our own government. Who do you trust? You only have one other choice. Trust in the Lord. We think of oppression, and many of them suffer because of their loyalty to God. In Hebrews 11, it talks about people who suffered, people who died, people who are still in the ground, have not received their reward yet. But it's coming, just like ours will be someday. It's coming. You know, some people, and maybe I shouldn't touch on this, but I have to now because I opened my mouth. Some people believe that when we die, we go somewhere else. But the Bible proves it in chapter 11 of Hebrews that those long before us are still in the grave, have not received their reward, the reward being in heaven. So it's pretty simple when you really look at what the Bible has to say and take it in its context. Some suffered fearful temptations, yet they remained loyalty to God. Let's look at an example. Genesis 39. Um, 7 through 12. Now we're talking about Joseph being a slave in Egypt. And if you read the story of Joseph, it's a beautiful story and a powerful story of God's guidance. I'll start in verse 7. And it came to pass after these things that his master's wife cast longing eyes at Joseph, and she said, "Come with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Look, my master does not know what is with me in this house, and he has committed all that he has to my hand. There is no one greater in the house than I, nor has he kept back anything from me but you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against who? Against God?" Stop and think about something. This young man had been sold to traders that were coming across the desert, going to Egypt. His brothers had sold him. He's tied up. He's a slave. They take him to Egypt. They sell him. Now, he's a young teenage boy. They sell him, and he's purchased by this Potiphar, who happens to be working for the Pharaoh, and he puts him in his household to work. And everything Joseph touched, God blessed. And because of that, he moved him up to where he had given Joseph his whole company, his whole business. Potiphar had a business, whatever it was, I don't know. The Bible doesn't really say. But he was a man of means, and he worked directly with Pharaoh. But Joseph now, all of a sudden, became the boss. Potiphar gave him everything he had and said, "You take care of it." He saw how God was blessing Joseph. There's lessons in this story for us today in what we do, where you work, who your friends are, how you respond to people in the world. Joseph had committed his mind, and I can imagine he's being taken in a caravan, riding maybe on a camel or a donkey or whatever, tied so he can't get away. And he's looking around, and he's passing over some territory where he knew his father was probably just over the next ridge. And he knew he would never see them again. He had to make a commitment in his mind and in his heart that he was going to be faithful to the God of his father. In order for him to stand and be able to deal with the situation that he had to have confidence in God. He had to trust in God that he had not seen, that he just heard about through his father. If you remember, read the story of Joseph if you haven't, because Joseph was a prized child. His father bragged about him. His brothers hated him because his father loved him so much. He went through trial after trial. And yet, when the rubber hit the road and he was really on trial for his life, he would not yield to Satan. And if you look at what's happened in the Bible, the people that Jesus healed, the people that he blessed, he didn't ask them what denomination they were. He didn't say, well, have you done all of this? Now, did you go to church yesterday? How about prayer meeting last week? Have you been there? No. They came to Jesus for help. And he never turned anybody away. Whoever he touched, whoever he healed, stayed healed. They were winners. They didn't get the consolation prize. They were like the Hebrew children in the fiery furnace. They won because of their faith in God. Not to be overlooked in this faithfulness that we're talking about are the temptations that the Son of Man himself endured for you and I. In Matthew 4, 1 through 11, it talks about it a little bit. After Jesus' baptism, it says, then Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Are you tempted by the devil? I am. And when he had fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, afterward he was hungry. Now when the tempter came to him and said, if you are, now did the devil know who he was? Sure he did. Sure he did. Remember, they had already had a fight up in heaven. He knew exactly who Jesus was. But listen to his words. If you are the Son of God, command that these stones become bread. I don't know about you, but I get a little hungry after a few hours. Jesus hadn't eaten in 40 days. Now, he's a human being. Now, he came here to show us what's possible. And Satan says, turn these rocks into bread. Well, I just happened to bake some bread 2 days ago. I couldn't do it by turning a rock into bread. I had to put it in the oven and do all the stuff that you have to do to prep for that. And then he tempted him again. Then the devil took him up into the holy city and set him on a pinnacle in the temple and said to him, if you are the Son of God, again he says, if you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he shall give his angels charge over you. In their hands you shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. What do you think would have happened if Jesus would have taken him up on that? You and I wouldn't be here today, I'll tell you that. Jesus said to him, "It is written again, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." I love that saying. Jesus said to him, "It is written." Where is it written? Written in this book. But at the same time, it should be written on our heart. That's what happened to Joseph. It was written on his heart. He would not sin. Not only against Potiphar, his boss, but against God. When we're tempted, do we ask God's help, or do we try to fix it ourselves? Let's turn to Revelation 3:10. Revelation 3, chapter 10. He's talking to the faithful church, Church of Philadelphia. As I studied this, I'd never paid much attention to this before. I'd read it many times. Verse 10 says, "Because you have kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial which will come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth." What a powerful promise. Think about those words. Because you have kept my command to persevere, I also will keep you from the hour of trial which will come upon the whole world to test those who dwell on the earth. Is that a promise? To me it is. It's a powerful promise that if we're faithful, if we trust in Him, we can experience the life of Joseph. We can experience the life of those 3 Hebrew children in the fiery furnace. It's his promise. That's what he says. He says it, red letters. I will keep you from the hour of trial which will come upon the whole world. I get excited when I read that. That's when Satan's going to declare an open war on us. That says that in Revelation 12:17. There will be open war against us. There may already be some places right now that are facing open war against. He's against. But remember, the consolation in the furnace is they won. There was no consolation prize. They won. They had faith in God and they won. The outcome of that experience, the fiery furnace, what did they lose? What did they lose in that fiery furnace? They lose the ropes that they were tied with, is about all. The physical bonds they lost. They were tied so they could be helpless against the flames. And aren't we doesn't the devil try to bind us, to distract us, so that we don't go to God and say, "Help, Lord, help me"? No, he has other things to get our attention, so we don't go that way. Such bonds are common today. But remember, the Hebrews were not harmed. Not even their garments were harmed. persecutions are allowed to set us free from the sin of evil habits. We go through trials and tribulations, but they're to help us overcome. Think of what the Lord says in Malachi 3. We do not always see why the Lord permits us to pass through trials, but in the end we shall praise him for the experience we had to pass through. What those worthies did in the furnace, showing that their walk with God had not been disrupted, is available for you and I today. It's right there for us. Their walk in that fiery furnace is a living testimony that if God is for us, who can be against us? If God is for you, who can be against you? Christ was with them, and that made the difference. Is Christ with you today? Are you struggling with an issue in your life that you can't get over it? Give it to him. Let him have it. He'll gladly walk beside you, and through that power that comes from him, you will overcome. It's a promise. It's not me standing up here and talking. It's in his word. If Christ is with us, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Their persons were unharmed. That shows how completely God cares for those who trust in him. Let's look at Matthew 10:30 for just a second. Jesus was getting ready to send out the 12 to go to work. And he told them a little earlier, he said, persecutions are coming, but I'm going to take care of you. Let's do 27, verse 27. I'll read 27 through 31. Whatever I tell you in the dark, speak in the light, and what you hear in the ear, preach on the housetops. And do not fear those who kill the body, but cannot kill the soul, but rather fear him who is able to destroy both the soul and the body in hell. Be careful of the Satan. Don't get hooked up with him, he's saying. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a copper coin? But not one of them falls to the ground apart from your Father's will. But the very hairs of your head are numbered. He's getting ready to send these guys out on an evangelistic series, and you know the school they'd been going through. They'd been walking with Jesus, and they still didn't understand him. But he's telling them, don't worry, just go and do what I've told you to do. I know how many hairs you have on your head. Don't you think I care about you? Do not fear, therefore. You are more valuable than many sparrows. Those are words to us today. Don't fear. Trust in him. Trust in him with your whole heart. A similar experience awaits us today during the last days just before Christ comes. Isaiah 43:2 talks about that. Isaiah 43, verse 2. It says, when you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you, for I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. Well, how can you beat that? Now that makes it clear to me why the three Hebrews made it out of that furnace, because he had already promised that. It had already been prophesied. I've got to tell you a story. There was a young man. I say a young man. He was probably in his 50s. He had retired from the Forest Service. Him and his wife had bought a little home in North Carolina, and everything was looking pretty good. They didn't have a lot of money, but he had a little retirement, and they were happy. And all of a sudden, he found out he had cancer in the throat. And he had gone and he'd had some tests done, and they tried to treat him, and the medication and the procedure at that time wasn't doing any good. They couldn't stop the cancer from growing. There were experimental medication out there that might help him, but it cost so much money he couldn't afford it, and his insurance wouldn't cover it. So they were just destitute. They were praying. His wife was praying, and he was praying, and she kept telling him, I believe God's going to perform a miracle. I believe God's going to heal you. He's going to take care of it. And he was getting a little discouraged. He was losing weight. He was weak because of the treatment of the cancer. And so they were really having a hard time. And in town, there was this businessman that had a business. He was a millionaire, had a lot of money anyway. And he was single, didn't have any family, didn't have any close friends. He had work associates, but nobody really close. But he loved to fly. And on this one particular day, it was a beautiful day, and the sky was blue, and he takes off and gets in his little Cessna, and up in the air he goes, and he's flying around and thinking, oh man, this is just, I love it up here. I'm all alone. And then he got to thinking, I wish I knew somebody. I wish I had a good friend, a close friend. And he's flying along, and all of a sudden his airplane, there was a loud pop and the engine stopped. Well, he didn't panic. Those little planes, you can glide them pretty good unless you hit turbulence. He said, well, okay, plan number 2. He tried to start it up again, and it wouldn't start, and he's sailing around, and now he starts looking for a place to land. And he's thinking, well, I don't want to land in these trees because that'll tear everything up. So he spotted this little lake, and he starts circling around trying to get into that lake, and then a gust of wind caught him, and when you don't have any power on your airplane, and I'm getting a little ahead of myself, because as he was flying around, he was wishing that he had somebody that would be a close friend. And he thought about God. He'd never had anything to do with God. He didn't really believe in creation, but there was a lot of questions in his mind about if God was really real that he couldn't talk to anybody about. Anyway, he finds this lake, and he starts circling, trying to get down to the lake, and the wind caught him, and he went into the lake all right, but he went in like at an angle and stuck the plane down in this lake. And it wasn't a real deep lake. I think it was around 10 feet or 20 feet deep, something like that. And he went in at an angle. And the last thing he remembered, see, it was the water rushing into the cab of the plane, and his head hit the front part of the aircraft, and he don't remember anything else. Just so happened that the fella that was retired, I was just talking about, lived not too far from that lake, and he happened to see the plane go into the lake. And he hollered for his wife to call 911. The plane just went into the lake. So he takes off running. Well, he's weak from the cancer, so he can't move very fast. He gets to the water, and he's looking, and about 100 yards away from the shore, he could see part of the plane sticking up out of the water. He didn't see anybody moving, like people were getting out or anything. And And he's standing there, and he's weak, and he can't do much, and he's thinking, what do I do? You know, it's going to be a while before the medics and the fire people get here to help him, or whoever's in there. Anyway, he decides, I'm going to go. I'm going to go see what I can do. So he starts off to the plane. And he has a hard time getting there because of his weakness of his body. And there's nobody moving. He dives down as far as he could go, and he tried to open the door of the cab, and he finally got it open and realized there was one person in the cab. There was nobody else. And he unbuckled him from his seat and had to go back up and get more air and then come back down and get him again. And the fellow was unconscious, so he's pulling him up out of the water, and he gets him up to the surface. Now he's got to drag him all the way back to the shore in his weakened condition. Well, make a long story short, he finally gets him to the shore. Half of his body's up on the shore. He starts trying to do CPR with him, and he's dying himself inside from his stressful exertion that he had to go through. He gets him up there, and he's working on him, and finally the medics come, and he gets up and starts to leave, and he gets up to the edge of the trees, and he collapses. Down he goes, and his wife tells the medics, oh, he's sick, he's got cancer, and he's had all this treatment, and so right away they went, some of them got a hold of him, and they got him some IV in him and got him going, took him to ER. Make a long story short, they both survived. His beginning of CPR helped the man that was in the plane, and when the medics got there, they were able to revive him, and they both ended up in the hospital together. And so the man came to him afterwards, and he said, man, I want to thank you for saving my life. And, he was happy that the guy was alive and everything was good. And he said, you mind if I come in your house? I mean, can I talk to you for a while? And so he goes in and they start talking. And he starts telling him how he's longed to have a friend, somebody he could deal with. And to make a long story short, he started talking about God. And this gentleman says, well, I want to give you something. So he handed him an envelope, and he said, I'd like for you to take this. He said, it's a gift. It's a little bit, maybe it'll help you along in your life somehow. And I hope I can continue to be friends with you. He went his way. Him and his wife were talking after the fellow left, and he took the envelope, and he said, oh, but he left me this envelope. So she opened up the envelope, and there was a check in there for $1 million. They both were just awestruck. Needless to say that he had the funds to get the emergency treatment, the experimental treatment that was available to pay for the money to get treated, and they got the cancer. And the gentleman that gave him the money became his very close friend, and they began to give him Bible studies. So you see, Satan works. It wasn't Satan's plan for this to happen. Satan's plan was for this guy to crash and kill himself. And the fellow that had the cancer would never have gotten the money. He never would have had the healing medication. But because of their faith in God and their prayer, and how they had the strength and the ability to help somebody that was in need, they both benefited from it. One gave his life to the Lord, and the other one, God saved him through medication from the gift of his friend. So what Satan had wanted to have happen to Joseph was kind of the same line. But Joseph's commitment to God allowed God to be the winner. There was no consolation prize at all. He didn't have to. Joseph won. The 3 Hebrews won. This fellow that had cancer won. The fellow that needed a friend won because of their trust and their faith in God.